My name is Lena Vance, and I learned the bitter taste of inadequacy in a sterile, antiseptic hospital room, cradling my newborn niece. My sister, Corinne, radiant despite the exhaustion of labor, beamed from the crisp white sheets. Our mother, Veronica, hovered over them both, a Madonna cradling her golden child.
Me?
I was a ghost in the corner, my congratulations hollow even to my own ears. Veronica barely glanced my way, her attention, her affection, reserved for Corinne and the tiny life she'd brought into the world. That day, the unspoken truth echoed louder than any celebratory cry. Corinne was the masterpiece, and I, the discarded sketch. Isn't she perfect, Lena? Veronica's voice dripped with a saccharine sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. She is. I managed my throat tight. Corinne's hand, delicate and manicured, rested on the baby's downy head. My own hands, calloused from long hours in the library and stained with ink from countless essays, felt clumsy and awkward. Just like her mother, my father, Grant, added, his eyes reflecting the same adoration Veronica held for Corinne. He'd always been a man of few words, but his silence spoke volumes. He never needed to say it. I knew I wasn't included in their little circle of perfection. Growing up, the comparisons were a constant hum beneath the surface of our seemingly idyllic lives. Corinne, the graceful swan, effortlessly gliding through ballet recitals and debutante balls. Me, the awkward duckling, forever tripping over my own 2 feet, my nose perpetually stuck in a book. Why can't you be more like your sister? Veronica would sigh, exasperated, as I presented her with another report card filled with A's, oblivious to the fact that my achievements were never enough to earn her approval. It wasn't the grades she cared about, it was the image, the effortless grace that Corinne exuded. Grant, lost in his world of mergers and acquisitions, remained emotionally distant. His presence was a shadow, looming large but offering no warmth. He saw us, his daughters, as extensions of himself, reflections of his success. Corinne, with her effortless charm and social graces, fit the mold. I, with my quiet intelligence and independent spirit, did not. My grandparents, Agnes and Walter Croft, were a different story. Their sprawling Victorian home, filled with the scent of baking bread and the comforting tick-tock of grandfather clocks, offered a refuge from the chill of the Vance household. Agnes, with her warm hugs and twinkling eyes, saw something in me that my parents didn't, a spark of something special. "You have a fire in you, Lena," she'd say, squeezing my hand. "Don't let anyone extinguish it." Walter, a retired judge with a stern demeanor but a kind heart, would sit with me for hours, discussing literature and history, fostering a love of learning that became my escape. "Knowledge is power, Lena," he'd tell me, his voice gruff but laced with affection. "Never underestimate its value." Their love, however, was a fragile shield against the constant barrage of criticism at home. There was always an undercurrent of tension, a subtle reminder that I was not truly one of them. Perhaps it was the hushed whispers behind closed doors, the strained smiles exchanged between my mother and Agnes, or the way Walter would sometimes look at me with a mixture of affection and pity. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that even in their sanctuary, I was an outsider, a guest in my own family. I was trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and privilege, yet starved for the one thing I craved most: acceptance. The summer I turned 16, Damon Thorne strolled into my life like a rogue wave, disrupting the stagnant waters of my existence. He was a friend of my father's, a self-made entrepreneur with a magnetic personality and a reputation that preceded him. He exuded an air of dangerous charm, a blend of sophistication and rebellion that both intrigued and intimidated me. Our first encounter was at a charity gala, an event I dreaded attending. Surrounded by chattering socialites and their preening escorts, I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Damon, noticing my discomfort, detached himself from a group of investors and approached me with a glass of champagne in hand. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he remarked, a twinkle in his eye. "You have no idea," I muttered, taking a hesitant sip of the bubbly liquid. He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. Then why are you here? Parental obligation, I replied dryly. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. We talked for hours that night, discussing everything from literature and philosophy to business and politics. He listened with an intensity that made me feel seen, truly seen for the first time in my life. Damon became a fixture in my life, a mentor, a confidant, a much-needed escape from the suffocating atmosphere of my home. He encouraged my intellectual curiosity, nurtured my ambition, and validated my feelings of inadequacy in a way that no one else ever had. He saw the potential that my family so readily dismissed. "You're sharper than your father, Lena," he'd say, his voice low and conspiratorial, and twice as ambitious. "Don't let them hold you back." He introduced me to a world beyond debutante balls and country club luncheons, a world of art galleries, independent films, and late-night conversations fueled by strong coffee and even stronger opinions. He opened my eyes to the inequalities of the world, the subtle yet pervasive injustices that simmered beneath the surface of our privileged lives. But even then, cracks were beginning to show in Damon's carefully constructed facade. Whispers followed him like shadows, rumors of shady deals, ruthless business tactics, and a string of broken hearts left in his wake. I chose to ignore them, blinded by my own need for acceptance and validation. He was the first person to truly believe in me, and I clung to that belief like a lifeline. Meanwhile, Corinne, despite her outward perfection, was starting to unravel. The pressure of being the golden child was taking its toll. Behind the flawless makeup and designer clothes, a deep-seated insecurity festered. She confided in me one night, her voice barely above a whisper, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. "It's all a lie, Lena," she confessed, her eyes filled with a desperate sadness. "I'm not who they think I am." I wanted to comfort her, to offer her the same solace that Damon offered me, but a wall of resentment stood between us, built on years of unspoken rivalry and perceived favoritism. I couldn't bring myself to bridge the gap, to admit that I, too, felt like an imposter in my own life. The cracks in the Vance family's carefully curated image were starting to widen, threatening to shatter the illusion of perfection they'd so meticulously crafted. My father's investments, once a source of pride and boasting, began to sour. The whispers in the country club grew louder, laced with speculation and thinly veiled schadenfreude. My mother, usually so composed, became increasingly agitated, her anxieties spilling over in sharp words and irrational demands. And Damon, ever the opportunist, watched from the sidelines, his eyes gleaming with a predatory glint. He offered my father advice, whispered strategies, and consolidated his influence within the family. His presence became a constant, a shadow lurking in the corners of our lives, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. One evening, he pulled me aside, his expression serious. "Your father is in trouble, Lena," he said, his voice low and urgent. Deeper than he realizes. My stomach dropped. I knew things weren't good, but the fear in Damon's eyes told me the situation was far worse than I'd imagined. He went on to explain the complexities of my father's failing investments, the precarious position he was in, and the potential consequences for our family. He offered me a choice, a veiled ultimatum that would forever alter the course of my life. "You can stand by and watch your family crumble," he said, his voice laced with a chilling calmness. "Or you can join me, and we can build something new, something stronger, something that can't be broken." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken promises and dangerous possibilities. I was trapped between loyalty to a family that had never truly accepted me and the allure of a future free from their suffocating expectations. The gilded cage was about to shatter, and I had to decide whether to stay amidst the ruins or forge my own path, even if it meant walking hand in hand with the devil himself. The catalyst arrived in the form of a hushed phone call in the dead of night. My mother's voice, strained and brittle, shattered the fragile peace of my sleep. "Your father, he's gone." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. He hadn't simply gone. He'd vanished, leaving behind a gaping hole in our lives and a mountain of debt that threatened to bury us alive. The carefully constructed facade of the Vance family crumbled overnight. The whispers turned into shouts, the speculation into accusations. The social circles that had once embraced us now shunned us, their sympathy as thin and brittle as the ice on a winter pond. Veronica, stripped of her social standing and financial security, became a ghost of her former self, drifting through the hollow shell of our once grand home. Corinne, her carefully curated world shattered, retreated into a haze of denial and self-pity. The pressure of being the perfect daughter, the burden of upholding the family's crumbling image, proved too much to bear. She turned to alcohol and fleeting romances, seeking solace in the arms of men who saw her not as a person, but as a symbol of her family's former glory. It was Damon who stepped in, seemingly to pick up the pieces. He offered legal advice, financial assistance, and a shoulder to cry on for my distraught mother. He orchestrated the sale of our family home, a necessary but painful act that severed the last tangible link to our past. He even secured a place for Corinne in a prestigious rehab facility, shielding her from the prying eyes of the media and the judgment of our former social circle. His actions, on the surface, appeared altruistic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing a deeper game, manipulating the chaos to his advantage. My unease grew with each passing day, fueled by his cryptic remarks and knowing glances. "Your father made some unwise decisions, Lena," he'd say, his voice laced with a mixture of pity and something darker, something that resembled satisfaction. "But every crisis presents an opportunity." He began to involve me in his business dealings, introducing me to his network of investors and lawyers. He taught me the language of finance, the art of negotiation, the subtle but powerful ways to leverage power and influence. He was grooming me, molding me into his protege, his accomplice. "You're a Vance, Lena," he'd remind me. "You have the blood of a winner in your veins. Don't let your father's mistakes define you." I threw myself into my work, desperate to prove him right, to reclaim some semblance of control in a world that had been turned upside down. I learned quickly, absorbing information like a sponge, my ambition fueled by a potent cocktail of resentment and a desire to prove my family wrong. One evening, Damon took me to a clandestine meeting in a dimly lit back room of an exclusive club. The air was thick with cigar smoke and hushed whispers. Men in expensive suits and women in glittering gowns exchanged knowing glances, their conversations laced with coded language I was only beginning to understand. He introduced me to a group of investors, their eyes assessing me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "This is Lena Vance," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "She's going to change the game." That night, I stepped into a world of power and influence, a world where fortunes were made and broken on a whim. I embraced the challenge, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I navigated the treacherous landscape of high-stakes deals and cutthroat negotiations. But the further I delved into Damon's world, the more I realized the true extent of his morally ambiguous nature. The whispers I'd once ignored now echoed in my ears, amplified by my growing understanding of his business practices. He wasn't simply a shrewd businessman. He was a manipulator, a master puppeteer pulling the strings of those around him, including me. He'd used my family's misfortune to his advantage, preying on their vulnerability to consolidate his power and expand his empire. He'd offered me a lifeline, but it was a lifeline attached to a noose, slowly tightening around my neck. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I'd been so focused on escaping the gilded cage of my family that I'd walked blindly into another, one built not of gold, but of shadows and deceit. I was trapped, caught in a web of my own making, and the architect of my prison was the man I'd once considered my savior. The question was, did I have the strength to break free, or would I become another casualty in Damon Thorne's ruthless pursuit of power? The guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of my complicity in Damon's schemes. I'd justified my actions as a means of survival, a way to rebuild my life from the ashes of my family's downfall. But deep down, I knew I was playing a dangerous game, one that could cost me my soul. Despite the moral quagmire, My ambition burned brighter than ever. Damon, sensing my internal conflict, pushed me harder, challenging me to embrace my ruthlessness, to shed the last vestiges of my naive idealism. Sentimentality is a weakness, Lena, he'd sneer, his eyes glinting with a predatory hunger. In this world, you either devour or you're devoured. He threw me into the deep end, entrusting me with increasingly complex deals, testing my limits, pushing me to the brink of my moral capacity. I learned to negotiate with sharks, to anticipate their every move, to outmaneuver them at their own game. I discovered a hidden talent for strategy, a knack for seeing the angles that others missed. I was good, terrifyingly good, and the rush of power that came with each successful deal was intoxicating. I built my own empire, brick by bloody brick, on the foundations of my family's ruin. I launched a tech startup, leveraging Damon's connections and capitalizing on the burgeoning digital landscape. My company, Phoenix Innovations, became a symbol of my resilience, a testament to my ability to rise from the ashes. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd become everything my family had never wanted me to be: independent, successful, and powerful. The media, ever hungry for a good redemption story, lapped it up. I became the it girl of the tech world, gracing magazine covers and delivering keynote speeches at prestigious conferences. My name became synonymous with innovation, disruption, and the audacity to defy expectations. The gilded cage I'd once yearned to escape was replaced by a throne of my own making. But the higher I climbed, the more isolated I became. The friends I'd made along the way were drawn to the allure of my success, their loyalty contingent on my continued ascent. The genuine connections I craved remained elusive, replaced by a network of superficial relationships built on ambition and mutual benefit. My relationship with Damon, once a source of strength and validation, became increasingly strained. He saw my growing independence as a threat, his possessiveness masked by a veneer of mentorship. He attempted to control my every move, to dictate the direction of my company, to remind me that my success was inextricably linked to his influence. "Don't forget who paved the way for you, Lena," he'd say, his voice laced with a thinly veiled warning. Loyalty is a two-way street. I chafed under his control, the resentment simmering beneath the surface. I'd become the very thing I'd once despised: a manipulator, a player in a game with no real winners. The guilt I'd tried to suppress resurfaced with a vengeance, amplified by the growing realization that I'd become a pawn in Damon's grand scheme. One evening, he summoned me to his penthouse office overlooking the city. The sprawling cityscape, a tapestry of glittering lights and towering skyscrapers, seemed to mock the emptiness I felt inside. He poured me a glass of expensive scotch, his movements deliberate, his eyes studying me with an unsettling intensity. "I have a proposition for you, Lena," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "One that will solidify your position at the top." He outlined a plan, a complex and audacious scheme that would crush our competitors and cement our dominance in the industry. It was brilliant, ruthless, and undeniably illegal. My stomach churned as I listened, the moral implications of his proposal weighing heavily on my conscience. "I can't do this, Damon," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It's too much." He chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "You've come too far to back out now, Lena," he said, his eyes hardening. "You're already in too deep." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Besides, wouldn't you like to see your family suffer just a little bit more?" His words struck a nerve, exposing the raw, festering wound of my resentment. The image of my mother's tear-stained face, of Curran's lost and vacant eyes, flashed before me. The desire for revenge, a dark and insidious force I'd tried to suppress, surged through my veins. I knew in that moment that I was at a crossroads. I could choose to walk away, to salvage what remained of my integrity, or I could succumb to the darkness, embrace the monster I was becoming, and unleash my fury on the family that had cast me aside. The unveiling was a slow, agonizing burn. My success, once a shield against my family's indifference, became a spotlight, illuminating the chasm that separated us. News of Phoenix Innovations' meteoric rise reached the ears of my estranged family, drawing them back into my orbit like moths to a flame. Veronica, her pride wounded but her desperation palpable, was the first to make contact. She called, her voice a fragile echo of its former imperiousness, feigning concern for my well-being, expressing a belated pride in my accomplishments. I listened, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest, recognizing the thinly veiled plea for financial assistance beneath her carefully chosen words. "It's good to hear from you, Mother," I replied, my voice devoid of warmth. We arranged a lunch, a stilted and uncomfortable affair in a trendy restaurant frequented by the city's elite. She arrived dressed in a faded imitation of her former elegance, her eyes scanning the room, searching for familiar faces, for a glimmer of her lost social standing. "You've done well for yourself, Lena," she said, her voice laced with a forced cheerfulness. "Your father would have been so proud." The mention of my father, the man whose absence had shaped my life, tightened the knot of resentment in my stomach. I didn't respond, letting the silence hang heavy between us. Corinne, fresh out of rehab, followed suit. She looked healthier, her eyes clearer, but a shadow of her former vibrancy remained. She apologized for her past behavior, for the petty jealousies and rivalries that had defined our relationship. Her words sounded sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she, too, was driven by a hidden agenda. "I'm happy for you, Lena," she said, her voice hesitant. Truly, I wanted to believe her, to forgive her, to rebuild the sisterhood we'd never had. But the years of neglect and resentment had carved a deep chasm between us. Even Grant, or rather, the ghost of Grant, resurfaced. A letter arrived, postmarked from a small island in the Caribbean, a place where he'd apparently been hiding from his creditors and the wreckage of his former life. He wrote of regret, of remorse, of a belated recognition of his failings as a father. He asked for forgiveness, for a chance to reconnect, to make amends for the past. His words rang hollow, a desperate attempt to absolve himself of his sins. Their sudden reappearance, their feigned support, only fueled my desire for revenge. Damon, sensing my resolve, offered his guidance, his expertise in the art of manipulation. He helped me orchestrate a plan, a subtle but devastating campaign to expose their hypocrisy and dismantle their carefully constructed illusions. "They want a piece of the pie, Lena," he said, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "Let's give them what they want, but on our terms." I used my newfound wealth and influence to lure them back into my life, dangling the promise of financial security and social redemption. I offered Veronica a position on the board of Phoenix Innovations, a symbolic gesture that would restore her social standing but give her no real power. I funded Corinne's passion project, a fashion line that I knew was doomed to fail, a subtle way to expose her lack of talent and business acumen. I even responded to Grant's letter, offering him a chance to return, to face the consequences of his actions, and to witness the empire I'd built from the ashes of his destruction. The Vance family, blinded by their own greed and desperation, walked willingly into my trap. They reveled in the reflected glory of my success, oblivious to the fact that they were dancing on a stage of my design, playing roles I had carefully scripted. The climax arrived at the launch party for Corinne's fashion line. The venue was packed with industry insiders, socialites, and members of the press. Corinne, dressed in a creation of her own design, radiated a nervous excitement, her eyes searching for validation, for a sign that she'd finally escaped her family's shadow. I watched from the sidelines, a glass of champagne in hand, my expression carefully neutral. As the evening progressed, the cracks in Corinne's carefully constructed facade began to show. The collection, a mishmash of ill-fitting garments and questionable design choices, was met with polite applause and thinly veiled criticism. The whispers started, the same whispers that had once haunted my childhood, now directed at my sister. The final blow came when a prominent fashion blogger, known for her scathing reviews, took to the stage, microphone in hand. She eviscerated the collection, her words dripping with sarcasm and disdain, exposing Corinne's lack of talent for all the world to see. Corinne, her face pale and tear-streaked, fled the stage, her dreams of fashion glory crumbling around her. Veronica and Grant, their faces masks of horrified disbelief, watched from the front row, their carefully crafted image of familial success shattered beyond repair. I met their gazes, my eyes cold and hard, the years of resentment and hurt boiling to the surface. The gilded cage they had built for me had finally collapsed, and they were trapped inside, exposed and vulnerable, at my mercy. The game was far from over, but I had finally taken control. The hunter had become the hunted. The reckoning was swift and brutal. Corinne's public humiliation was just the opening salvo in my carefully orchestrated campaign of revenge. I'd studied Damon's tactics, learned from the master manipulator himself, and now I was putting those lessons to devastating use. My next target was Veronica. I leaked information to the press about her involvement in a shady charity, revealing her embezzlement of funds and her hypocrisy in presenting herself as a philanthropic socialite. The scandal erupted, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. The social circles that had once embraced her now turned their backs, their whispers laced with disgust and schadenfreude. She became a pariah, ostracized and alone, stripped of the social status she held so dear. Grant, still clinging to the hope of reconciliation and a share of my newfound wealth, proved to be the easiest target. I presented him with a carefully worded contract, offering him a substantial sum of money in exchange for a full confession of his financial misdeeds and his abandonment of his family. He signed without hesitation, blinded by greed and oblivious to the trap I'd laid. I then leaked the confession to the authorities, ensuring that he would face the legal consequences of his actions. He fled the country, a disgraced fugitive, his dreams of a comfortable retirement replaced by the harsh reality of life on the run. With my parents neutralized, I turned my attention to the silent accomplices in their cruelty, my grandparents. Agnes and Walter, despite their moments of kindness, had ultimately chosen to protect their daughter, turning a blind eye to her emotional abuse and enabling her destructive behavior. I confronted them in their Victorian home, the scent of baking bread now replaced by the stale odor of decay and regret. I laid bare the years of hurt, the scars of their indifference, the pain of their complicity. Agnes, her eyes filled with tears, attempted to defend her actions, clinging to the maternal instinct to protect her child. Walter, his face etched with shame, remained silent, his gaze fixed on the worn Persian rug beneath his feet. "You knew," I accused, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You knew what she was doing to me, and you did nothing." The confrontation was a cathartic release, a purging of the years of unspoken resentment. It didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd craved, but it did bring a sense of closure, a final severing of the ties that bound me to my toxic family. But my victory was short-lived. As the dust settled, as the wreckage of my family's lives lay scattered around me, I began to question the cost of my revenge. The emptiness I'd felt before intensified, amplified by the realization that I'd become the very thing I despised, a manipulator, a destroyer of lives. And then the final blow. Damon, his eyes gleaming with a chilling triumph, revealed the true extent of his manipulation. He'd orchestrated my father's downfall, deliberately sabotaging his investments to create the chaos that had propelled me into his orbit. He'd used me, exploited my vulnerability and my desire for revenge, to further his own ambitions. "You were a pawn in my game, Lena," he confessed, his voice devoid of remorse. "A means to an end." His betrayal cut deeper than any wound inflicted by my family. He'd been my mentor, my confidant, the one person I'd thought I could trust. Now I saw him for who he truly was, a predator, a master manipulator who had used my pain for his own gain. The realization shattered me, the weight of my actions crushing me beneath its weight. I'd sought revenge, but all I'd found was ashes, the remnants of a life consumed by anger and resentment. I destroyed my family, but in doing so, I'd also destroyed myself. I confronted him, the the fury coursing through my veins giving me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I accused him of his treachery, his manipulation, his utter disregard for human decency. He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed in the opulent emptiness of his penthouse office. "You're just like me, Lena," he said, his eyes mocking me. "You just haven't learned to embrace it yet." His words struck a nerve, a terrifying truth I could no longer deny. I had become a monster, a reflection of the very people I'd sought to destroy. The gilded cage had been replaced by a prison of my own making, and the bars were forged, not of gold, but of my own bitterness and rage. I was trapped, alone, and lost in the darkness of my own creation. The question now wasn't how to escape, but whether I could find a way to forgive myself, to salvage what remained of my soul, and to rebuild a life worth living. The price of silence was a deafening roar in my ears. Damon's betrayal had shattered the last vestiges of my carefully constructed world, leaving me adrift in a sea of doubt and self-loathing. I'd become a mirror image of the people I despised, a manipulator, a destroyer, a prisoner of my own rage. I retreated from the world, seeking refuge in the quiet solitude of my apartment. The city lights, once a symbol of my triumph, now seemed to mock my isolation. The silence of my apartment was broken only by the ghosts of my past, the whispers of my conscience, the relentless accusations of my own guilt. I needed to confront the truth, to face the wreckage I'd created. I started with Veronica and Grant. I arranged a meeting, not in a public space, but in the ruins of our former family home, a stark reminder of the life we'd lost. The house was a hollow shell, stripped of its former grandeur, the air thick with dust and the memories of happier times. Veronica sat on a packing crate, her face etched with lines of weariness and regret. Grant paced nervously, his eyes darting around the room, as if searching for an escape. "I know," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I know about Damon, about his role in Dad's downfall." The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the creak of the floorboards beneath Grant's restless feet. He finally stopped pacing, his eyes meeting mine, a flicker of fear in their depths. He promised," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "He promised he could save us." Veronica remained silent, her gaze fixed on the floor, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The truth, raw and ugly, hung in the air between us. They'd been willing participants in their own destruction, blinded by their greed and their misplaced trust in a man who had used them both. I told them everything about Damon's manipulation, about my own complicity, about the years of resentment that had fueled my desire for revenge. The confession was a painful but necessary act, a purging of the poison that had festered within me for so long. The confrontation with my grandparents was even more difficult. They'd retreated further into their world of denial, clinging to the belief that their daughter was blameless, that I was the architect of my own misfortune. I didn't spare them the details, recounting the years of subtle but damaging emotional neglect, the constant comparisons to Corinne, the silent complicity that had allowed the cycle of abuse to continue. Agnes wept, her frail body shaking with sobs, her cries a mixture of grief and guilt. Walter, his face pale and drawn, finally broke his silence. He confessed to a long-held secret, a truth that shattered the last vestiges of my idealized image of my family. He revealed that I wasn't Grant's biological daughter. My real father was a man he'd met during a business trip, a fleeting affair he'd kept hidden for years. A secret that had shaped my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow, the ground shifting beneath my feet. It explained so much, the emotional distance, the lack of connection, the constant feeling of being an outsider in my own family. The truth, however painful, was also liberating. It freed me from the shackles of my family's expectations, from the burden of their judgment. I was no longer Lena Vance, the discarded sketch, the unwanted daughter. I was simply Lena, a woman forged in the fires of adversity, a survivor who had finally found her own voice. The pieces of the puzzle finally fell into place, revealing a picture far more complex and disturbing than I could have ever imagined. Damon had known about my true parentage, had used that knowledge to manipulate me, to fuel my resentment, to turn me into his weapon of revenge. I left the Croft house, the weight of the past lifting from my shoulders. The rage that had consumed me for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of sadness, a quiet understanding of the complexities of family and the enduring power of secrets. The journey to healing had begun, a long and arduous path that would require me to confront my own demons and to forgive not only my family, but also myself. The gilded cage had been shattered, the prison of my own making dismantled. I was free, finally free, to build a future based not on revenge, but on self-acceptance and the promise of a new beginning. The echoes of the past reverberated through me, a constant reminder of the choices I'd made and the price I'd paid for revenge. The Vance family, once a monolithic symbol of wealth and privilege, was in ruins. Veronica, stripped of her social standing and financial security, found solace in volunteer work, her arrogance replaced by a quiet humility. Grant, a fugitive from justice, lived a solitary existence, haunted by the ghosts of his past mistakes. Corinne, humbled by her public failure, discovered a genuine talent for design, not in the glamorous world of high fashion, but in creating functional and affordable clothing for women in need. She found redemption not in the spotlight, but in the quiet satisfaction of using her skills to empower others. Agnes and Walter, their health failing, spent their remaining days in quiet contemplation, grappling with the consequences of their silence and the belated realization of the pain they had inflicted. They reached out to me, offering a genuine apology, a heartfelt expression of regret for the role they'd played in my suffering. I accepted their apology, not because I'd forgiven them completely, but because I recognized the futility of clinging to the past. Damon, his empire built on deceit and manipulation, eventually faced his own reckoning. His shady dealings came to light, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of his own greed. He was arrested, his reign of power brought to an abrupt and ignominious end. I watched the news reports with a strange detachment, feeling neither satisfaction nor triumph, only a weary sense of finality. I sold Phoenix Innovations, severing my ties to the world that Damon had created, the world that had almost consumed me. The money, once a symbol of my success and my revenge, now felt tainted, a reminder of the compromises I'd made. I donated a significant portion to various charities, focusing on organizations that supported women and children escaping abusive situations. It wasn't an act of atonement, but a small step towards rebuilding my life on a foundation of compassion and empathy. I left the city, seeking refuge in the quiet solitude of the countryside. I bought a small cottage, surrounded by rolling hills and fields of wildflowers, a place where I could finally breathe, where the echoes of the past were softened by the gentle whispers of the wind. I started writing, pouring my experiences onto the page, transforming the pain and anger into stories of resilience and hope. I wrote about the complexities of family, the enduring power of forgiveness, the importance of finding your own voice in a world that often tries to silence you. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I sat on my porch, watching the leaves turn vibrant shades of red and gold, I received a letter. It was from Corinne. She wrote of her newfound purpose, her passion for helping others, her gratitude for the second chance she'd been given. She wrote of forgiveness, of a desire to rebuild our relationship, to finally forge the sisterhood we'd never had. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the sun wash over me, a sense of peace settling in my heart. The journey had been long and arduous, a descent into darkness followed by a slow and painful climb towards the light. I'd made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I'd also learned valuable lessons about the destructive nature of revenge, the importance of self-acceptance, and the enduring power of hope. I wrote back to Corinne, a simple message of acceptance, an invitation to visit, a promise of a new beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but I faced it with a newfound sense of clarity and purpose. I was no longer defined by my family's expectations, by Damon's manipulation, or by the mistakes of my past. I was Lena, a survivor, a storyteller, a woman who had finally found her own way home. My legacy wouldn't be one of wealth or power, but one of resilience, compassion, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The gilded cage was gone, replaced by the boundless expanse of a future filled with possibility, a future I was finally free to create.